Welcome back, chess friends. This time we're headed to the distant future, the year 2001. The setting is a spaceship called the Discovery 1, bound for Jupiter, with Dr. Frank Poole and the onboard supercomputer HAL 9000 just about to start a game of chess. Dr. Poole has the white pieces and he opens with pawn to king's 4. And the reply is pawn to king's 4. And yes, they are using descriptive notation, almost as if they're not from the future, but rather from the 1960s. But anyway, we have knight to king's bishop 3, knight to queen's bishop 3, and a bishop to queen's knight 5. So the Roy Lopez opening. HAL goes for the Morphy defense. He pushes his queen's rook pawn. And of course, Poole retreats his bishop back to queen's rook 4. Knight to king's bishop 3. Queen to king's 2, and now HAL doesn't seem to like this bishop, so he decides to chase it away with pawn to queen's knight 4. Of course, Dr. Poole moves it, but it's also kind of good for him because he's now attacking this weak pawn. But HAL doesn't seem to mind. He just moves his bishop out the way of his path to castling, and we continue with pawn to queen's bishop 3rd. And as we said, HAL castles, and Dr. Poole decides to follow suit. And in this position, the supercomputer decides to give up a pawn for rapid development. He plays pawn to queen's 4, leading to pawn captures pawn, knight captures pawn, and now Dr. Poole's knight captures an extra pawn, so now he has 7 pawns to HAL's 6s. But HAL doesn't care, he's just going for rapid development. He plays knight to bishop 5, attacking the queen. So this forces Dr. Poole to move the queen, and he heads towards the center of the board. This attacks the knight back. It also attacks this knight with 2 pieces, and also X-rays the rook, meaning that this knight can't move without losing the rook. But again, HAL doesn't care. He just moves the knight to capture the knight, leaving the rook free. So Dr. Poole goes for it, which of course is a massive blunder. He's just not realized this yet. It allows HAL to play queen to queen 6, effectively locking in all of the queenside pieces here. They're out of the rest of the game. Poole realizes he needs to get some pieces over to help with the defense, so he tries bringing his bishop back to queen 1. And again, HAL just does not care. He plays his bishop to king's rook 6, which reveals an attack on the queen and also piles up the pressure onto the pawn in front of his king. And wait a minute. Yes, I think we can dial into the video phone and see the rest of the game live.
Anyway, queen takes pawn. Okay.
Bishop takes knight's pawn.
A lovely move. Rook to king 1.
I'm sorry, Frank. I think you missed it. Queen to bishop 3. Bishop takes queen. Knight takes bishop. Mate.
Yeah, looks like you're right. I resigned.
Thank you for a very enjoyable game.
Very interesting indeed. So let's just go over those moves. Queen takes pawn. Bishop takes knight's pawn, attacking the rook, so rook to king's 1. And here HAL suggests queen to bishop 3, leading to bishop captures queen, and knight takes the bishop with checkmate. The king's in check, and he can't move to these 2 squares because the bishop's guarding them, and the other knight's guarding the bishop. So checkmate, and Poole just says, yeah, it looks like you're right, I resign. However, HAL is not right. He's not right at all. All is not well aboard the Discovery 1. First, in this position, the computer said queen to bishop 3, whereas the correct notation for black's moves would be from black's perspective. So it ought to be queen to bishop 6, the 6th rank from black's perspective. Secondly, it's not mate in 2. Poole is actually able to hold off mate for 2 additional moves. Queen to bishop 8, and now because the threat was actually knight to king's rook 6, delivering the checkmate while the queen guards the bishop, this is no longer possible because the queen is guarding the square, giving Dr. Poole extra time. In fact, HAL is forced to capture the queen, which gives Dr. Poole time to push his pawn and give the king an escape square. So after knight captures pawn, king moves, and then knight to knight 5, delivering the checkmate. It was actually checkmate after a few extra moves than HAL said. So a supercomputer would never make these simple errors, which implies that they're not errors at all, but rather deliberate lies. HAL is deceiving the humans on the ship, and the humans completely trust him without question.
Dave.
This is now evident as Paul accepts the lie and just resigns. HAL may go on to further deceive.
Dave, this conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.